So we're going to move into our main speaker time. One of the things that we'd like to ask you to do is to turn off your video projection. And so down in the lower left corner, if you're on a regular computer, you should be able to stop video. That will be able to allow us to just see Jessica and Danielle at that time. So if you can go down and do that while I get the pleasure of introducing them. Yeah, I feel like this is such an honor to get to introduce these two ladies. I just admire them so much, and I've learned so much from them, from reading their books. And yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm getting kind of lost in that. They are both amazing writers. They are tireless advocates for displaced people and for the underserved, underprivileged people. And they have lots of years of experience of walking with people who've been in these situations of displaced people. So Danielle, I brought your two books so I can plug them. These are Danielle's two books. They're very worn and underlined. And so this is Assimilate or Go Home, and The Myth of the American Dream came out this last spring. Two books that I would highly recommend that I've learned a lot about myself, I think, as a believer here in the United States, and just in the work we do, and kind of that white savior attitude, all those kind of things. They're just so good, and so highly recommend. Jessica's book, After the Last Border, came out sometime this summer, I think. Another just incredible book. I think for me, I have a daughter who's a counselor, and so we're very careful that we don't ask about people's journeys, just because we don't want to re-trigger all those kind of things. So for me, it's just given this huge insight, this window into what life was like for them making that decision to flee their homes, cross over borders, and then come to the United States. So thank you. Thank you for your writing. Thank you for your advocacy. And I'm going to let you guys take it over from here. So excited.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laura. And I have to say that I just love Nick and Laura. They're so amazing. I met them at one of these gatherings a while ago. So thanks so much for putting this together and your hard work. I'm so excited because I get to chat with my good friend, Jessica Goudeau, today. I'm mostly going to be interviewing her because, she just has this incredible book that I hope people are able to engage with. Really quick, if you don't know my story, I have lived and worked in refugee and immigrant communities in the United States for about 15 years. And actually, that's how I got connected with Jessica. Jessica, you are better at the details. Like, how many years ago did we get connected over the internet?
We need our friend Amy, who is like the kind of keeper of this group, but it's been a while. I want to say 2013. Has it been that long? It's been 6 or 7 years. Danielle and I are in the same writing group, and we connected because I read a blog post and I was like, oh my gosh, this is someone who is approaching the world in ways that I can only hope to approach the world. I just loved your approach from the very beginning, just in reading your writing. And so we formed a writing group, and now there are 6 of us that we don't even meet. We just talk all the time over Voxer, and who are sharing the writing life together.
Yeah. And so we both originally connected over this theme of working with refugees. And we're both people who come from more privileged spaces in the United States. We're both people of faith, both Christians, and both of us had our lives sort of upended by relationships with people who had been resettled in our cities. Now, I'm so glad that Laura held up the book, but so Jessica did just recently published this book called After the Last Border, and it profiles 2 women who end up being resettled in Austin, Texas. And Jessica, I'm just going to ask you really quickly, could you just sort of do an overview of these 2 women and what the book, kind of the narrative of the book follows them through?
Yes, I will. But first, I'm going to take a plug and also talk about your book. You didn't ask me to do this. I'm telling you that I get to. One of the things that I really love about our friendship, and also the way that our writing speaks to each other and the rest of our group as well, is we are concerned with some of the most core parts about who we are as Americans and how that interacts with our faith. And so all of us in this group are Christians. Some of us are writing more exclusively for Christian audiences. Some of us are not. But I feel like our books really speak to each other. So some of my answers are going to also reference back to some of Danielle's work, which is holding our feet to the fire as people of faith. Are our values, the values that we state that they are, and how is that affecting the way that we kind of view the world? And so I think that really, for me, that's how it all began. So I am a Christian. I was at a community center with my church volunteering. I was speaking Spanish, and in walked a group of Burmese refugees. And I was like, who are these people and why are they wearing the hand-woven clothes that I recognized from a couple of summers in Thailand? And I had no idea what it meant to be a refugee. I mean, I knew the term, but like, it wasn't something that I thought this is exactly what I want to do with my life. And I feel like it's so important for these to be relational stories. This comes from my friendship. So I've known Muna since 2007. And when the refugee rhetoric really shifted in 2015, I have a PhD in literature and was running a writing center and fully intended to have an academic job. I had worked with refugees in a voluntary capacity, running a nonprofit, working with artisans, and thought it was just a really lovely chapter of my life. I really enjoyed it. I got to meet Danielle and several other like-minded people who were doing this kind of work. And then they all got jobs and we successfully ended, and I felt like it was over. And then the rhetoric shifted so drastically in a way that was really, it just felt like it bottomed out. People used to support refugees across the political aisle, people of all faiths. And all of a sudden there was just this incredibly sharp turn. And I remember the feeling of sitting in a writing center and thinking, I know former refugees, I know how to talk about these things in a way that can be ethical. I'm not going to share their story and I'm not going to do damage to them, or at least know the things that I need to avoid. And I know how to write. I feel like God is calling me to this moment. And so for me, this is so much more, and I love being able to talk to people of faith about this. This is so much more than just a book that I wrote. This is a life in which I feel like I have been lifted out of one track into another. And so I began writing with Muna originally, and then wanted to show not just the story of someone who had come in 2007 under George W. Bush, when lots of people came over from Myanmar and there was like wide support. I also wanted to show a similar story for someone who came about 9 or 10 years later. And so I encountered Muna, asked several friends, and Hasna, who came over from Syria. So Hasna's story of coming out of war, not out of a camp, coming after or right before the Muslim ban, being here under the Trump administration, it has just been a very different experience. And this is not a partisan thing. This is just to show the rhetoric and how things have shifted. So I wanted these two stories to kind of show who we were, who we've become. And then throughout the book, I have a history section that really begs the question, is this who we really want to be?
Yeah, and I think that's why your book is so powerful, is because it tells these two stories of two women who come from different ethnic backgrounds, but they were also resettled in different Americas. And I think that's one thing you kind of make clear. Things have shifted just culturally, but more important than that, just policy wise. And so this book is so beautiful. I will say, I always recommend my friends' books, but the New York Times also highly recommends this book. So you don't have to take my word for it. And I love that you are coming from the same space as many of us on this Zoom call, where we are Christians who want to help refugees, and maybe we even have a background in doing that. So like, I don't think people who know you know like what a shift this has been for you, from you were doing like a small business with women in your community to transitioning to writing like a New York Times lauded profile of these women. And I also love what Laura said, that as someone, I'd encourage everybody on this call to read it, because I agree, like I'm not able to get into the nitty gritties of my friends and neighbors' lives either. And so this was like a gift. These two women gifted you with their real story. And I know the hours and hours and hours and hours you spent with them, because I'm in a writing group with you and we talk every day. And so this was hard work. And I think you already mentioned it, but I just wanted to give you the chance to say, what made you think, I need to write this book? I need to immerse myself, like, especially when you were profiling Hasna and you had to research everything going on in Syria, everything under Assad. Like, this is like the worst kind of work, right? To immerse yourselves in these atrocities. And, why did you say, I want this book to come out in 2020? Why was it so important for you?
So when we began the process, my agent and editor came down to Austin to meet Muna and Hasna. And so Hasna wanted the world to know what was happening in Syria now. And I think, we often view these stories as if they are finished and they are complete, and this is the thing that happened. And for Hasna, this is very, very present. So there's so many differences between interviewing Muna and Hasna. Muna, I had known for 13 years, and we had a deep friendship outside of the book, and will continue for the rest of our lives. She's one of my closest friends. Hasna, I met at the very beginning of this process. She doesn't speak English. We had the most amazing translator who volunteered her time. I still cannot believe it was an incredible gift that she gave. And I kept saying, like, are you okay with doing this? And basically every Syrian that I know that was involved in this, I had a group of Syrians who were beta readers for it and caught several mistakes. I'm sure that there were more, but they did an amazing job of really entering this and helping me understand the complexities of this culture, because it's not a country that I had ever been to. And part of my goal in this was to bring this fresh story to people in all of its raw urgency, without doing damage to Hasna. And I think that is so complicated. That's a very complicated space for us to walk. And so I love that Laura said that, and that you've said this, Danielle. Like, so many of us who, I have done this in the past, where I approach former refugees as if their story is the sum of them. And so I'm like, oh, tell me more. Was it terrible? Were there bombs? Was it a landmine? And I have seen what I have done personally to people. I have learned from my own experiences how not to do this, right? And so I needed two women who really wanted to tell their stories and who felt the same kind of urgency that I did. And in doing that, I basically followed their lead, and their lead, it took us 2 years. And it wasn't as if, like, for Muna, we had these interviews, we could do about an hour or two. She was doing it fully in English. We were able to kind of mark our space together, and she told me her story over this time. And it was pretty chronological and followed a reasonable pattern, and we kind of knew the story that we were building together. With Hasna, it was as if she just brought the contents of her suitcase and dumped them. And this is all, I literally have goosebumps now. This is all so real. It is all so traumatic. And so often we ask people who have been through this trauma to be their own spokespeople. Mm-hmm. And part of what I really wanted to do in this is to take on the responsibility of doing it as ethically as possible. She had absolute control. She left so many things out of her story. All of this was her decision. Pseudonyms was hers, all of these details, all of it. But I wanted to be the carrier of this trauma and grief so that she does not have to beg people to pay attention to her, but I get to be the person taking on the weight of sharing this, because I think it's really important for people to understand what is happening now. And so that's part of why we had this incredibly beautiful space with Amina, and who is the pseudonym of the translator, and Hasna. They can't tell their stories without putting people that they love in danger. We had to hide so many of the details, but I wanted this raw story to get out there, not just the story of what happened 20 years ago or how this felt when her kids are old enough to really share the story.
Yeah, and I just think, for me, as someone who's been friends with refugees for 15 years, I've heard, parts of stories that people want to share. I watch the news, I read headlines, but I feel like your book particularly devastated me because of how you did two things. One is you kind of paralleled the stories of Muna and Hasna, right? So is it Karen? Is Muna Karen? Yeah, a Karen refugee, yeah. And then a Syrian refugee, right? More current day. And then you interspersed it with a history of refugee resettlement in the United States. And these three elements work together to come to a pretty devastating place at the end. And maybe I'll chat about that in a second, but I know this is so hard and this is a terrible question to ask, but can you give a really brief overview of the roller coaster of the U.S. refugee resettlement? No pressure, no pressure, Jessica.
So we're going to go back to 1652. No, I'm teasing. In the history, it's such a complicated thing, because one of the things that I found in this, there are a couple of things. The arguments have been the same throughout our history. These people are coming to take our jobs. They're not the kind of people that we want in this country. If they come, they're going to hurt us. They're fear-based, right? Security-based arguments. all the kind of rhetoric, even the nice ones, I talk a lot about better safe than sorryism, like, oh, I feel bad about it, but I just feel like it's not a good idea to do that. So I wanted to lay out, these arguments have been happening since the 19th century at least. We have recorded, political cartoons in which we have people making exactly the same arguments about Chinese immigrants or Irish immigrants or Italian immigrants that are currently being made about Syrian immigrants. And so part of what I wanted to do is like, this is the tale as old as time, right? To quote Beauty and the Beast. At the same time, the partisanship has really shifted. So the Republicans used to be the people that we call liberalizers. And this is a term historians use to talk about those who want to open the door to people, mostly in immigration, but especially when it comes to refugee resettlement, to those in need, right? Restrictionists are the people who want to close those doors. So what happened is there was a real moment of xenophobia when the economic crisis of the 1930s hit, and the restrictionists were like, literally, there is no room for more people. We don't have enough jobs to go around. And so that was the Democrats at the time really closing the door. The language that was used was awful, and it was abysmal. It was a quota system in which we said we literally only want people from Northern Europe. So people from, various parts of the country were not able to come. And then after World War II, there was a moment of profound public awakening. And that's really where the book, the history section, begins with that. Like, this is the moment when everything changed. In a 6-year period, decades before that of policy were changed as the US led the world in changing the way that we talk about and deal with refugees. And there were a lot of problems that were created with those policies, but at least was a major step. And so really refugee resettlement became different from immigration starting in about the 1940s. And it was only finalized as an act in 1980. So the 1980, we talk about refugee resettlement being about 40 years old. Well, 40 years old this year. And that's because it was a federal refugee resettlement program that was started in 1980. And it was not a controversial thing. It was like the Senate approved it unanimously. It was like everybody knew that it was totally fine. And so what I wanted to show in this was like the history of the policies, but also how the American mood about refugees informed those policies. So during the civil rights era, when it was popular and at least people were talking about it, we had massive changes to the immigration system and the refugee resettlement, and really started looking to Africa and India and Pakistan and Asia and various, I know I said 2 continents and a couple of countries, so I want to recognize that those aren't parallel, but all of these different regions that we had not been inviting people in before, and began kind of expanding it. And so for me, it gives me hope that in the United States, this is an ever-shifting thing, right? So we can change public opinion, and in changing public opinion, that's the number one thing that affects policies.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's interesting that that gives you hope, because it kind of doesn't give me hope. Just recognizing where we're at right now as a culture. And I'm sure you've experienced this too, of being friends with people who have been forcibly displaced post 2016. Even if the policies were reversed and people could come in, they would be being resettled in a space that maybe they don't feel very welcomed anymore, just because of what's happened. But you're right, looking at the long scope, I guess it's power to the people, right? Power to us, the people on this call. We can be a part of saying, you know what, we want to be a place that does welcome the foreigner. And therefore, we all have this job to kind of address dehumanizing language against immigrants in general, right? Mm-hmm. And to kind of continue the conversation forward. That's something I got out of your book. I'm not sure if that's what you exactly wanted, but I wanted to say the reason why the end of your book is so devastating to me is because you do share this story of Muna, who maybe fits more of like our traditional displaced person profile, right? Where there's definitely some hard things. There's definitely trauma. Things are not easy in the United States, but it ends on a pretty happy note because that is the reality. That's her reality. She is making it right now. You know what I mean? And so there's that. And then we have this history of the United States refugee resettlement program, which definitely has some ebbs and flows and all that stuff. And then we get to Hasna's story, all of the stuff that happened to her in Syria, in Jordan, all the stuff going on with her kids, all of this. And then she finally gets to the United States and she's just waiting for all of her kids to join her. She's alone. She has one 17-year-old daughter, but all her kids and grandkids, they're all in these horrific positions. They all want to come to the United States. And then boom. Yeah. What happens? There's this ban that says absolutely 0 people from Syria. can come to the United States. And in fact, in some of those history things, you talk about like how many governors of the United States just flat out said, we will not resettle anyone from Syria. And this is before, right? Trump made the travel ban.
Larger, yeah, this was in 2015.
Was it 30 something governors?
Yeah, I'm sure that I should probably know the exact number off the top of my head, but yeah, there was a major shift basically saying they no longer wanted to, and it was the first time that this had happened, that there were governors speaking out and saying they didn't want to resettle Syrian refugees.
Yeah.
And it was connected to what was happening in Europe at the time, and the stereotypes are having 31 governors, thank you. Like I know it's in 30 something. It was part of the larger rhetoric of what was happening at the time. It was that shift. And I think that's what you and I have talked a lot about this. We can't make this about one president. We can't make this about one person. This is on all of us, and this is on the entire nation in many ways, in which these are the conversations that we're having on a larger cultural level. I think you were going to ask a question.
Yeah, well, I think that just so that number like 30, 31, it really stood out to me because that's the majority. That's the majority of governors, right? Like, again, this is not a partisan thing. Like, this is a majority culture of what's happening in our country, which, you know, could be described as the fear of the stranger. And so what it's like to view this Syrian woman who is a lot like us in some ways, a lot like our own moms, a lot like any of us, who is desiring safety for her family. She's told, right, the whole point of the U.S. refugee resettlement hinges on family reunification being something that's always been a part of this program, this historic human rights program. Family reunification has always been a part of that. And then due to cultural shifts against immigrants and Muslims in particular, all of a sudden family reunification is not on the table for her. And it truly, I mean, right now, talking about Hasna, it is not on the table for her.
It is current. It's the current thing. Yep.
And so we, as the reader, are invited into her life, and now we are invited to sit in that reality.
Yeah.
That she will not be reunited with her family unless something changes in our country.
Yeah.
I just thought it was masterful, but it was also just so devastating. I don't know. I'm sorry. That wasn't a question. That was just me processing.
Part of what, this is what Danielle and I have talked about this. So I will say this too, Danielle has been a part of this journey, in that I have shared a lot of the secret things that I'm not able to share. And so Danielle was there when I was writing this book. Hasna's family was in danger. They were in danger in Greece. They were in danger. And I don't want to give too much of the book away. I don't want to kind of share all of it, but like literally her entire goal from beginning to end. She starts off in a beautiful and peaceful middle-class home. The war comes into her life. I just had an event in which we were talking about I always get goosebumps about this part, about the school pickup line, when there was a situation with her youngest daughter when she was a fourth grader, and there was like a terrorist basically who came right at the school pickup line. And then I left the interview where her daughter was there and Hasna was there, and they were telling the story in a way that they had not really talked about together before. And then I went to go pick up my own kids. And they're like, Mom, why are you crying? And I'm like, it's fine. I'm just like, it's safe. I can come get you. I mean, I was a basket case, because these are real stories of real people who had a lovely life. They had great neighbors. She never locked her doors. She always talks about how the name Syria tastes like honey on her tongue. It is this beautiful country full of poetry and full of hospitality and amazing food. And we as Americans often view it as, oh, it's that kind of place. You know, it's just like chaos. Well, they're used to this kind of stuff. And what in the world are we talking about? What would it be like if I couldn't go pick up my children because there was a terrorist and I had to sort through the rubble and try to find my fourth grader? I cannot imagine the grief of that. And so of course she wanted to keep her kids safe, and of course she wants to be with her grandchildren. And so I think the cruelty of this, I don't know if I'm ever going to be over the cruelty of this. I don't know if I'm ever going to be over watching this firsthand and seeing the cruel things that were done to their family in Syria. And Danielle alluded to that. My group, we had some pretty serious conversations about secondary trauma when I was doing that research. And I spent a lot of time on YouTube and Reddit verifying her facts. And in verifying her facts, I had to watch images of children be tortured and killed point blank. It was one of the most horrific things I've ever done in my life. And so those cruel things happened. And on the list of cruel things that have happened are the policies that we have done to her family and to thousands of others that are from Iran, that are from Iraq, that are from Afghanistan, that are from Syria and other places. We are the cruel people that we want to be better than. And I just don't know if we have really reckoned with that on a national level. I don't think we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on. And I just did a workshop with some people, so this is probably like overkill. But, I was just saying, like, I get the question a lot from Christians who say, how can we welcome refugees, right? How can we do that right now? And, I'm just saying we can't. And what we can do right now is lament that our hands have been tied by the policies in place. And we can lament the culture of fear that we are just swimming in when it comes to the marginalized neighbor, the person seeking a new home. And, you mostly get to speak more to groups that are not coming from a religious space. And so you maybe don't always get an opportunity to talk about your faith. But I wondered, Jessica, if you wanted to take a few minutes just to talk about how your faith compels you. The book it ends on a very depressing note. I mean, you didn't mean it to be. You're just stating reality. You're stating reality, which is to me is a part of the Christian form of lament. You articulate reality, right? And you grieve it. And so I wondered if you just want to take a few minutes to talk about your faith, how your faith informs your work, and like what do you say to people who are like, well, how can we help refugees right now?
Yeah. So I think there are two things, and I think that they have to be parallel to each other. And I think it's so our personalities that you're like, we just need to lament. And I'm like, we need to get out there and activate. So it is very true. Both of these things you can't do one without the other. I do think that there is a place for deep lament. I also think if we have any hope of changing, and I really genuinely do feel hope. In fact, it's so interesting to me because while it was depressing and I got to see it and it was really hard, I also still really have hope out of the story. And part of it is because I was able to share the story and I get to talk to people all around the country that really, really care about this and are trying to figure out how to engage in their communities. And so part of why the New York Times review that you were talking about, one of my favorite things is that they called it a great subversive gift for someone who doesn't agree with you. And I don't remember the exact quote, but like, I really genuinely did want to write a book that you can give to your uncle and be like, listen, we need to have better conversations about that. Can you read this? And then we can talk a little bit more without necessarily putting my friends in the actual traumatic position of having to talk to some of my aunts and uncles, right? And so I feel like there is a place for us to just really grieve and to inner focus and to figure out what has happened to get us here. But there's also a place for us to really activate. Sometimes politically, we like to talk about voting. And I think especially in this election, it has never been more important because this has become a partisan thing when it should not be partisan. This should be something that is outside of the partisan divides right now. But at the same time, even if best case scenario, refugee resettlement changes if we have a new president who raises the cap to 125, there is so much work to do. And because of that, we are going to have to figure out how to have better conversations. We can't just talk about refugees. We also have to talk about asylum seekers. We have to really address what's happening in terms of the asylum situation that's happening. I live here in Texas. And I saw someone saying this, we should talk about this in Texas. Believe me that I am. And there are lots of us here that really, really care about making sure that we're thinking in terms of refugee resettlement. Refugee resettlement is often siloed when we have these conversations and we act as if it's not a part of the larger immigration debate. But my next book is going to be about immigration because we need to confront our own histories and we need to talk about how this fits in the larger, like, what do we do with people who have crossed the border because of gang violence in their country and they want to have a better life for their kids? Do we not have compassion for them too? We have to have more complex conversations. And those of us who are here, our job is to educate ourselves and to share with our communities. I truly believe that the most important way that we can change hearts and minds is literally our neighbors. And I think if there are groups of us that are doing this, talking to our churches, talking to other people, we can do that. So for me, my faith is the thing that compels me. It's the thing that wakes me up at night. I had a beautiful conversation yesterday with Hayas, with a rabbi who was talking about the hospitality in the story of Abraham and how Abraham, and I'm going to butcher it. I'm so sorry to the person that actually said this, but she was saying that when Abraham saw the three visitors, he looked up and then he saw, and then he ran. And I loved that view. So first thing we need to do is look up, and then we need to see, and then we need to run. And for me, it connects best to the story of the prodigal son. When the prodigal son is coming back and the father runs, he doesn't just kind of saunter over, he picks up and runs. I think we need to have passion. I think we need to have a fire lit underneath us. I think we need to shake people by the shoulders and tell them, these are the things that we have to do. And our faith is the thing. Our God is a God of the margins. Our God calls us to the people who are in trouble and persecution. We can't rest as long as there are thousands of people who are being persecuted by our country, by other countries. And it's really incumbent on us as people of faith to get this conversation going in our communities on a larger level too.
Oh, Jessica, I mean, this is what I think is so great about being in community with like-minded people who also share the same faith. It's like, it relieves the burden off of my shoulders. I hope everybody who's listening can just sort of take a moment, say we're among friends here. We're among people who care, who lament, who mourn, and yet we can all be inspired by Jessica's activism and enthusiasm and your hope. And you're right, you have been talking to so many people around the country. So we are not alone. I will say we have to end the interview now, and people are going to go to groups and discuss some questions really quick. And you don't have to answer all the questions, just answer what you want and what you feel comfortable with. And then I believe people are going to come back and you'll be able to, ask Jessica a question, ask me one, I guess, but we have Jessica, the expert here. So that's who I would ask. So we're not alone. And yeah, I think we're going to break up into groups now.
So I'm thinking as we come back in, it might be good if we go ahead and turn off our video again and let Jessica and Danielle kind of be the center, and we can, if you can put questions in the chat box, then we'll be able to kind of feed those, if I can get down to those. I know that there was one just as we were leaving about, sorry, go down. About the greatly restricted number of refugees allowed, and maybe how the COVID crisis has impacted the refugee resettlement.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the last 4 years of this administration, the average admission ceiling, just for you to know, is about 95,000. So we've gone. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's gone from. We had like 220 under President Reagan of refugees that were admitted. The ceiling is the cap of how many can come in, but not always that number has come in. And so it's based on the variables. This is an incredibly complicated process that involves large scale international cooperation and refugee response centers who are doing things in different countries around the world. So for the numbers to match, that's always a little bit complicated, right? And so we had about 95,000 was our average in the history of refugee resettlement. And then we, in the last 4 years, went to 45,000, 30,000, 18,000, and then it was set at 15,000 for the year ahead. And so it is very clear that this administration they've been very open and very clear about the fact that they're targeting this program, right? And so under COVID, we've had less than 10,000 people come. So immigration itself stopped. I think that they're saying it's going to be around 11,000. I've been hearing from there's a man who is in Iraq who writes me every day on WhatsApp about his family and how he was part of the SIV program. He finally got, after like 6 years of waiting for it, he finally got an appointment, and it was the day after Trump was elected. So his very first appointment was then, and then his second one was supposed to be in February, and it was then when the Muslim ban was enacted, and so he and his children are not able to come over. And so he writes me every day, any chance you've been able to talk to anyone, any stories that you're able to write. He's one of several people that have found me and often write me these stories. I've done interviews with other people over the years, and then they'll send their friends to me. So I get these messages all the time. We think as if we're not thinking about these policies, that this doesn't affect real people, but their lives continue. People remain in danger. So the fact that we're only allowing 10,000 people to come over at a time when we have displaced numbers nearing 80 million around the world, it is really to our national shame. Resettlement is not the only answer, but it is one of the things that we offer to people who've lived through war. And so we really need to make sure we advocate for that as things begin to open up after COVID.
This next question I think is directed toward Danielle, probably. It's from a good friend of ours. How do you navigate white church cultures that silence or avoid lament of wrongful government policies towards refugees or racist policies?
Wow. Yeah, I think that this is something I experience a lot as someone who I'm public. I used to be more public writing specifically about refugees, and now more just talking about American culture and ideologies that maybe shape our lives in ways that can take us away from the gospel and how Jesus wants us to live. And so I definitely get these messages. I got some last night and today just saying, you shouldn't live in fear, you know, stop being sad about the state of refugee resettlement or you know, over 220,000 deaths of COVID-19 in the United States. Like, God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. And I think, Mark, you kind of already said it in your question. That's actually a silencing tactic, right? That people use to sort of dismiss maybe things that make them feel uncomfortable. And as we see in the scriptures, lament or articulating how bad the reality is often seen as threatening to the people who are in control and in power and need us to say, you know, the way it's going is okay. The way we exploit people, the way we exclude people, we all need to do that to keep America great or whatever. And so sometimes the lament is seen as a threat to that. And so I think for me personally, it's just helpful to be like, lament is a scriptural thing. It's a way to pray. It's a way to interact in the world when things are not going okay. And it's okay to expect some pushback. It's okay to say that grief actually is threatening to people. And I would say just coming from a more individualistic culture who maybe, you know, all we sing in our church are happy songs, it's given me a little bit of grace to say, yes, people like myself, white evangelicals, we just don't have those muscles to engage in lament. And so that might not be the safest space for us right now. However, the global church understands lament. Many churches, like the Black Church of the United States, understands lament. And so there's other faith communities we can go to for that. But Jessica, I don't know, do you have something to say about that too?
Yeah, I really wanted to be clear that I feel like it is so incredibly important that we do the work of lament. And I didn't want to move past what Danielle was saying, because I think that these are actually really well connected. I feel like until we, you know, someone who has been through grief and who has been in counseling, until you see what is actually happening and you name it and you sit with it, you can't move forward, right? And so I feel like we as a church have to have clarity. And by church, I mean that kind of global structure. And I don't just mean white churches. I don't just mean white American churches. I think we need to have, what Danielle's saying, a global perspective, but we need to be clear about what our country's policies, what our church rhetoric, what our communities are doing. And that clarity, lament gives us language to talk about how sad we are, and it gives us language to identify what's actually happening. And once that has happened, then we move into spaces of activism, but it comes out of that lament. And this is such a biblical principle, right? Like, one of my favorite verses is once more a remnant of, like, once more, I'm going to butcher it now, but like a remnant of Judah takes root below and bears fruit above. And I think it's when things are decimated there that God is moving in those places, right? And so once more out of Judah, anyway, I'm going to mess it up. I keep messing it up. But it's the idea that there's like a seed still here that's taking root and that's growing above. And those of us who've had things like that happen in our life, not nearly to the same level, and those of us who've walked alongside former refugees have seen this. It is not just like, hey, everything's fine now, it's all wonderful. It is like, you're never going to get over this. And there is hope in there too. There is new life that comes. I think we need to be ready for that, to activate and to move and to engage and to speak out, but we need to do it rooted in our grief and in our clarity that comes from that.
Yeah, and I see there's another question there about basically saying what people were talking about in the breakout room is they need to lament that the church is not responding, right, very well to these things. And I think that was also in Mark's question. And I do want to say, like, I understand that grief of not being able to grieve with your fellow Christians right now is really hard, because the reality is, I shared this in my workshop, is, you know, I think when Pew Research did a poll last year, white evangelicals were the highest group. 75% said they had no moral responsibility to resettle refugees in the United States. That was higher than any other demographic group. And so, you know, maybe this space is a unique space for us to gather and share that grief and just acknowledge it. But a hallmark of false prophets in the scriptures is they're always trying to say peace, peace, when there is no peace. And they use these words unity, and they use these words don't live in fear. But our friend Christiana, she's kind of awesome. She was telling us about, you know, people who are like, we shouldn't live in fear when it comes to, you know, being worried about COVID-19. It's like, that'd be great if you ever brought that up when we talked about refugees or gun rights or any of these things. So we don't want to live in fear, but lament is not the same as fear.
I think there's one, I appreciate Jennifer put in a note about the need for sponsors for asylum seekers. So make sure you check that in the chat. She gave a number of someone that you can call. Georgia had a question about God wanting to use my voice in place of privilege to raise awareness of the plight of refugee friends. Do you have any key principles or rules of thumb about how to honor your friends and their stories and share from your personal experiences and perspective? And that'll be our last question. I'm so sad we're gonna have to end soon, but anyways, either of you can answer that, both of you. And
Danielle, you start.
I was on mute. I was like, this is Jessica's question. I will say I'm jealous of Jessica because she found people who were bursting to tell their stories. In my work, especially I mostly teach English to women who are not literate. And I always, even in my English classes, try and do like, let's do our stories, let's do oral histories. And they're always like, no. So the people I am most friends with are like, we want to keep our heads down. We want to survive. That is their main goal. And so I have shared in my writing some stories, but I've had to go do less and less and less as I am deeper in relationship with my friends. I will say I share a few stories in my latest book and just share stories in a way that honor people's dignity and view them as whole, complex people, and make sure they sign off on whatever you say because they're real people and they want to be in control of their narrative. So I'm sure Jessica has more to say on this.
You know, I've been using the metaphor lately that if one of my friends has cancer, and it's a close friend that I have, I don't immediately begin being like, oh, so what's that like? How do you feel? Oh, is that just terrible? There's like a sensationalism that we recognize when that happens, especially if it's someone that you really care about. And yet, for whatever reason, we often have the lens that refugees are their visa category, right? Like I've lived as a tourist, so why don't I talk about the tourist experience? Why aren't I expected to spend the rest of my life talking about the 6 months in which I was a tourist in Santiago, Chile? And yet refugees are not refugees their whole lives. It's just a very finite amount of time in which this thing happened, and then they had to have this visa category, and now they come over and they're former refugees, right? And so I feel like coming in with the kind of respect that we would want to have for our friend or for ourselves in that situation. What Laura and Danielle were saying is I do not go into relationships with people and say, tell me your story. What's happening with you? Was it just all awful? Were there bombs? Did you lose people? I mean, it's a social skills thing, right? Like we know better than to do that. And yet we often do that. And I think for me, I am going into communities now as someone who is a writer. Before I went into communities as a friend and activist, and those are advocate, and those are very different ways of entering into a community. So I think for most people, entering as a friend who's really intentional, who wants to listen, who becomes the person that is needed in that situation. So if you need to change the way that you speak, or you need to change the way that you listen, or you need to figure out whatever it is to do, that you don't help in this kind of imposing way, but like listen to and connect in a bottom up sort of way. I think those are the things. I became someone who ordered yarn in Thailand because I got to know a group of people. Like I became the thing that was needed, instead of being like, my spiritual gift is to teach, so let me teach you, right? Like there wasn't a lot of teaching happening. There was just a lot of like weaving happening. And I was like, I guess I can figure this thing out. And it was beautiful step by step as we built this friendship together. So I think respect and listening and becoming the change that you need to be can be really, really important. Change that you see. That's a better way to say it.
Deep breaths. Wow, you guys are awesome. We just are so thankful you were able to come and share part of your day with us today. Thank you. Blessings on you guys and all the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks for.
Yeah, so you guys can go ahead and unmute your videos if you want. We're going to hear from one more refugee speaker. Her name is Fowsia. She is from Somalia. And after that, then we'll come back and wrap up a little bit. But
hello, everyone. My name is Fowsia Adan. I am currently a student at Boise State University pursuing a career in public health. I am originally from Somalia. I've lived in Kenya for a while before I came here to Idaho in 2012. When we first, were coming here, we didn't know where we're going. We've heard of big states like New York and other states, but Idaho, we didn't know where we're coming to. So we were like, okay, where are we going? But we were glad we're coming. When we got here, it was a great experience because from our resettlement agency to the volunteers we had to the family, they match families, new coming families with family that's already here. so that they get to know about the culture and the different things. I think that was an amazing thing because we are still in contact with that family we had. We have great ties with them, and it was just amazing because it gets rid of the nervousness that you have. Not all of it, but at least now there's someone that, you know, if you're confused with something, you can say, hey, what's this? How can I, you know, navigate through this, and how can I navigate through that? The other part of it was the volunteers. They were amazing. They were very welcoming. They were asking questions. They were answering our questions. So like the past 8 years have just been amazing, you know. I started high school here because I was 16 when I got here, so I had to go right into high school. But 16, okay, 14, 15, not 16. But when I started high school, you know, I didn't know the school system here, you know. I knew the school system in Kenya, so it was like, okay, how does this work? Again, teachers came into my, you know, rescue. They helped me through understanding the system, specific teachers that were really amazing. And, you know, when I was uncomfortable with some situation, putting me in places that they were like, hey, if this is what you need, let this teacher know. Here's the resources you want. Here's the resources you need, and how can you get to them? This is the contact person. And then transitioning from that, coming to college, again, I had some amazing people that were there throughout, whether that is helping me with, you know, applying for financial aid, or applying for the different scholarships, or being a scholarship provider themselves. So Boise itself has been such a great city that my mom, whenever she gets a call from any of our people that we knew that are in other states or cities, and they say, should you move, you know, you should move to Minnesota or Seattle, or she says, no, I found home in Boise and we're staying in Boise, we're not going anywhere. She bought a home like in 2007, about 3 years ago. And that just says it all, you know, we're here to settle, and you know, it's our new home. As I said, I'm currently a student, so I'm finishing up my college undergrad education in 2 months, and I am excited to pursue my master's after that, and you know, pursue higher education and experience the professional life out there. And my passion specifically is to work with the youth, and specifically the refugee youth who I can help with, like the resources that were there for me. How can they navigate? How can they overcome certain challenges that they might have? So yeah, that's me. We've lived here 8 years, as I said, and Boise is just, I can't describe how great it's been to us for the last 8 years, and we are glad we came here. Thank you.
Yeah, I love Fowsia. And yes, I think we had some really good advertising for Boise, Idaho. So sorry about that. You guys are all welcome. We would have had you all here if we could have, if COVID hadn't gotten in the way. So, boy, what a rich special time. I just always come away from these times just so thankful, feeling so encouraged. Yeah. So thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you joining us from different places in the U.S. The regional was intended to be for the Northwest, but we're thankful that a lot more people were able to join us from Canada and throughout the U.S. We do want to say just again a special thank you to Jessica and Danielle, who I know are super busy. They've been on Zoom calls, podcasts, you name it, just Google their names, you can find them, and a lot more that they're talking about. You guys are awesome. Thank you for your voice. It's so needed at this time, and I just thank you. Thank you to our workshop leaders, Annalise, our daughter, get a little plug for her. Thank you. Joel and Deb and Aubrey and Danielle too, and Nick, good job. And also for Stephen, who I don't know, he didn't introduce himself, but that's Danielle's brother-in-law, and he did an awesome job. It was fun to hear his story. Good to hear his story, not always fun. And can we just all clap for our tech team, for Cindy, for Marianne, James, you guys, and Michelle for just being a huge help to us. We can't could not have done this without you. And then a rich thank you to the choirs and to the speakers from the Speakers Bureau. And then Nick's going to close us.
Okay. So let's just pray together to close our time. Lord, we just thank you for such a rich time, a time where our hearts met each other and experienced just a kindred spirit in this journey on the Refugee Highway. We just thank you so much for the way in which you brought us together, brought different talents together, and just thank you for those who've contributed their time and their talents to make this possible. We just also, Lord, we just recognize that we are a bunch of cracked jars of clay, and we are on this journey with you, that you are our source of strength. You are our all in all. And so fill us, Lord, with your spirit. Lord, with your grace, fill us with your wisdom, give us strength and courage to become people of integrity, to become people whose biblical values of loving neighbor and welcoming the stranger line up with the living out of our lives that is expressed in lament and expressed in action, and also just unite us, Lord, as a community of counter-subversives to forward a narrative that counters the dominant narrative of fear and division. So, Lord, we give you thanks. We ask that you will continue to remind us that we can go farther and with more joy if we go together. So glory be to you, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
And then reminders.
Oh, yes. We do have a few reminders. So, yeah, we will be sending out an email that will have the Refugee Highway Partnership website, and that's going to have information on it about the RHP leadership team. And there's also, RHP is on Slack, as was mentioned, Facebook, there's Twitter, and you can also go to the Sound Bites by Jacob Mao. These are ways that are just part of the strategy to bring us together, and as people who love Jesus and love refugees. So help us to do this and to gather together. We also are part of a local organization here called Glocal, and that will be also mentioned in that email. So those of you who are, shameless plug here, those of you who are local, you can look up our website as well and get involved here locally with us.
And still give if we want to.
What's that?
And also give if we want to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Jason, for that.
Too.
And so, also there'll be a survey that's going to be included in that email. And please take the time to do that, because that'll help us improve as we continue to do these regional roundtables together. So.
Yes, this is recorded, and again, it'll be posted on the RHP website as well as the Glocal, with the workshops up on that as well. And just another plug, 2 great books. Got to plug you guys. So, thank you. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
See you.